Hello and welcome. This is Rising from the Ashes, and we are here today with Steven Samra, and he is going to tell us a little story about how he overcame some struggles. So, Steven, if you would like to tell us your story.
Tracy, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really grateful, and I think this particular podcast is one of the most important podcasts that I've either contributed to or been able to be a part of. And the reason for that is because I have a long history of both mental illness and substance use disorder. It goes way back to childhood, and I can start by kind of just giving folks a little background about who I am and where I'm at today. So, as you said, my name is Steven Samra, and I have been the deputy director for the SAMHSA Brass Tacks Project over the last 9 years. And that project came to a close in September of 2020. And I continue on in sort of recovery work and a variety of other contracts and opportunities that are in front of me. And the reason I'm even in those roles is because of the lived experience that I bring to the role and to the work generally. And that lived experience, as I mentioned early on, really started as a child. I came from a pretty traumatic home life, if you'd even call it that. My sister and I both had been essentially raised by a single parent. And through that period of time, we were children and moving into kind of those formative teenage years. My sister and I were shuffled around from family member to family member, and for a little while we were in foster care, and then back to some family members. And throughout that whole experience, a lot of just general sort of verbal abuse, neglect, isolation, the things that are really damaging to children who look to their parents and older family members as those folks who protect them from serious challenges and who share the love and the respect, and they provide the appropriate discipline and guidance that young children need as they're trying to reach adulthood. And so I tell you all that because the trauma that my sister and I both experienced is complex. It's not a one-time event. It took place over a period of 10 or 12 years. And in all of that, the shuffling from household to household, and essentially I hate to say this about my mom. I love my mom to death, but the truth is there was a lot of neglect there. And the one constant that was always a part of my sister and my life was that animals were prominent in much of our young lives. And those animals, we learned at an early age, they didn't care if you had carved your initial onto a piece of linoleum in the kitchen floor. They didn't care if you lit a trash can on fire because you were trying to help dig out the trash. All these things happened to me, and they resulted in some pretty serious punishments. But through all that, the animals loved me, and they didn't judge me, and they provided comfort and love at a time when there was very little of either coming from our family members. So at that very early age, I developed a connection, particularly with dogs. But I'm a cat person, I'm a raccoon person, I'm a ferret person, I'm a horse person. Basically, if it's a critter, I'm pretty much going to love and protect it in any way that I can. And that doesn't mean I'm not a meat eater. I still do that, although I will admit that the older I get, the more difficult that becomes, just because of my connection to the critters in my life. So, anyway, fast forwarding a bit into my adulthood and my journey in both active addiction and with unchecked mental health challenges. I lived a pretty challenging life, and I left school in the 7th grade, ran away and hitchhiked to Florida, and I began moving back and forth from Detroit to Florida, and for running drugs. It's really the easiest way to say it. And all through that time, as that was happening, animals were still a big part of my life. But I was in transit so much that I just didn't have a place that I could keep my animals in a way that they should be kept. I could have put them in the car with me. We hitchhiked a lot. It would have been very difficult to do that. And so I lost that sort of connection to my critters. I'll say this: I didn't lose it. It got suspended while I was busy living my life in active addiction and active mental health challenges. So those challenges continually caused problems to arise in my life, and those problems were building in their severity and seriousness over time. So anybody who's been actively addicted to a substance like heroin or any of the other drugs out there knows that those lifestyles begin to become all-consuming, and they continually put you in ever more serious danger, both from accidental overdose, the legal system, the family, the units around you. All of those things get impacted by addiction and by untreated mental health challenges. So I have known for a long time that I probably had a mental health issue going on, but the truth is, because of stigma, because I had seen how our community, our brothers and sisters, my parents and family members, how they treat people with a mental illness, horrific. It's terrible. And so I didn't admit to that. And in fact, I had lied to myself enough that for much of my adult life, I just would never admit that I had a mental health challenge, particularly a serious one. And I used to say, well, listen, I might be a dope fiend, but I'm not crazy. And the truth is that I was never crazy, but I was dealing with some mental health issues that were the reason that I was self-medicating. And I had not been able to make that connection at the time anyway. But there is clearly no doubt for me that in the active use, what I was doing was attempting to medicate away the mental health challenges that were causing me so many challenges in holding a job, challenges in trying to go to school, challenges in engaging appropriately with family members, with the general public, with my peers and my friends. And all of that was a result of my inability to control the way that my emotions express themselves. So this emotional dysregulation that I had, I was going to say had, but the truth is I have it to this very day, would cause the most difficult and embarrassing challenges for me, because early on I learned that let me share a story. So when I was a young lad, about 5 or 6, my father was long gone. I don't know my father. And my mother had tried to go to college. This is 1965. And when she went to school, she left us with her brother and his husband, or his wife. And it was a really abusive, verbally abusive home. And long after I had left there and grown up, I learned that my sister was the person that my aunt and uncle wanted to come live with them. They didn't really want me there, but in order to get my sister, they had to agree to take us with them. So I didn't know that at 5 years old, but what I can tell you is that I remember how I was treated, and I can remember the wild difference between how I was treated and how my sister and her cousin were both treated. And so I share that because it was hellish. And I left that home and returned a few years later. I probably was 9 or 10. And I was back at this house for just a couple of weeks. I remember that for whatever reason, my mother needed a place for me and my sister to be, and this place turned out to be the place that was available. So I was outside one afternoon. I don't know what I was doing, but my aunt came out, and she was in attack mode, basically. And she was raising the riot act around something that I had done, and I don't remember what that was. And she started to come at me. And when she came at me, there was a bat. And I think it was a wiffle ball bat, so it wasn't a serious bat, but it was a bat. It was laying down on the ground, and I picked that bat up, and I told her, basically, as I was smacking the bat in my palm, not today. And I saw the fear in her face, and I watched her back up away from me, and I realized at 9 or 10 that when I pick up the bat, people listen to me and they leave me alone. And that became my default response, and it is still a default response to this day. And I have spent a big chunk of my life trying to figure out how to control that piece, that don't pick up the bat, find another way piece. And I'll be honest, it's still challenging and difficult because I got results with that. And that's what taught me to pick up the bat when I needed people to hear me. So, dealing with that, you can imagine what those who are charged with helping those of us with serious mental illness and addictive challenges, they will say that we are non-compliant. They will say that this is the way that as you express these emotions, they are, I'm sorry, I can't think of the term right now, but it is saying, essentially, that you're unable to control your behavior. And often the passion, the animation, as I would begin to have these. But I would push back against things that I didn't really like or didn't want to have happen to me. People misinterpreted my animation and passion for rage, and I always struggle with that because in my mind I'm thinking, you haven't seen rage yet. Wait till I throw the TV through the window, and I've done things like that in my life. That's rage, right? And I'm nowhere near that yet, but I could tell that it was scary to some people, and I couldn't change that because that was really the only coping mechanism that I had at the time. I didn't know how to be, I didn't know how to negotiate. I'd get so anxious and filled with anxiety that I would immediately. It was a trauma response, folks. That's what was happening. And the moment that trauma response happened, essentially I shut off the thinking adult in my head and went back to what I know works for me as a child. I pick up the bat. So I'm sharing all this with you because I need you all to understand that I have seen lots and lots of counselors and psychiatrists and psychologists over my lifetime. And in doing that, I've often been given some, odd diagnoses. I've had, probably more harm than any good from the interactions that I've had with the vast majority of trained professionals who were sent my way to help and support me. So I share all that because it's important for you to understand that I couldn't figure out what the hell was wrong with me. And because I had been essentially told that I'm a bad person, that I was the black sheep of the family, that I was going to amount to nothing. And then I had this, coming from family, and then I had, those folks who were trying to help and support me saying essentially the same things, and were masking it in some clinical terminology. But basically, I was walking away from them feeling like, wow, I'm really broken, I'm unrepairable, and that almost became a self-fulfilling, prophecy, right? If you think I'm this bad, let me show you. What's the point in doing anything right if I never get credit for that, and all you ever see in me is this bad, broken, dreg of society? So I carried that for a long time, and it showed all the time. It showed in broken relationships. It showed in my inability to hold a job. It showed in the fact that I was just in deep poverty. It manifested itself over and over. And the only constant in all of that was that even when I couldn't and probably shouldn't have had animals because I couldn't care for them in the way that that they should be cared for, they were still in my life. And if they were the only things at times that brought me any comfort and any joy, and they were also the only things that allowed me to step outside of myself and care and nurture another living being. And trust me when I tell you, I didn't know how to do that because that never happened to me. Nobody nurtured me. Nobody nurtured me or my sister. We just, we were basically considered outcasts in our own family. And I'll tell you why as we get a little further on. But bottom line is this. I began to, really begin to wonder why I was enduring what seemed to be just one horrific hardship after another, after another, after another in my life. And I couldn't break free from all of these accumulative hardships and challenges. Everything from leaving school in the 7th grade and never attending high school. Those challenge that I created because I ran away and began skipping school. But imagine what I lost in the 4 years that most people go to high school. By the time I was 18, my mother, who had been our caretaker, suffered a cerebral aneurysm, and it left her completely disabled, dependent on me to provide care, and in unbelievable poverty. I mean, we were living on her Social Security check, which was about $800 a month, and I had a job that paid minimum wage. Back then, it might have been $4 an hour. It wasn't much. It's not much today either, but back then it was even less. And so everything about my life, it was just like, it was almost like, I was down, and then somebody came along and kicked me, and for good measure, somebody behind that person decided to give me a kick too. And this is not a story about me being a victim and me being helpless. It is my story about the difficulty of trying to move through your life with unchecked mental health and substance use challenges, and nobody to help provide you the guidance and support, and most importantly, love and hope that help most of us, move through our lives. So, by the time I was in my 30s, and this is when I had my first, real thoughts about suicide. It was because I had by now had children, was still, horribly impoverished, couldn't find a pathway out of poverty, and now I had the burden of trying to care for my children as well. And the difficulty of doing that, and trying day after day with really no hope of anything better, was so demoralizing that I began to have suicidal thoughts, and I had a lot of them. And that stress, that trauma, those challenges that of trying to live my life, just trying to live it, just trying to make it, from one day to the next, from one paycheck to the next, and knowing that this is it, it's not going to get any better than this, I could barely handle that. And so as I had these suicidal ideations, as they're called, even my children, I used to think, God, they'd be so much better off if I was just gone, and they were able to get the kind of support and help that they really need, but they're never going to get because I'm in their lives, and I've been essentially blocked from those services and support. So if I was gone, they might stand a better chance than I did making something out of their lives. And so I was ready. And I knew I was going to do it. I had a plan, and I had the wherewithal. And the only reason I didn't is because whenever I looked at my dogs, the thought of leaving them in somebody else's hands, and I'm sorry that this sounds so crazy because I was willing to do this with my children, but I was unwilling to do it with my dogs and my cats. But the thought of leaving my dogs and having them end up in a shelter or, worse, it was so traumatizing to me that I couldn't do it. And so they gave me a purpose. My dogs gave me a purpose when nothing else in my life would. And those dogs, back then, certainly saved my life, and they are the reason that I'm here with you today. Now, throughout the rest of my life and up to present day today, I have worked on a lot of my behavioral health challenges and issues. I'm in long-term recovery from a substance use disorder and an opioid use disorder. I am on several different medications. I have severe PTSD, severe ADHD, bipolar disorder, and the challenges that I've faced over the last 20 or 30 years. I'm 60 years old today. I have slowly been working through using the medications appropriately, stepping away from illegal substance misuse. And throughout it all, animals have been present in my life. And in the last 5 years, the last 6 years, I did a medically supervised withdrawal from the medication-assisted treatment program. I'd spent about 16 years on methadone to treat a heroin addiction. And after I came off those medications, I had a resurgence of mental health challenges. Now, this was before I had gotten my mental health diagnoses and began my medication treatment. So I came off the methadone, and I was very ill. And I was mentally ill for a couple of years, but I kept thinking that this was called post-acute withdrawal. And it's really common for people who have an opioid use disorder. And so I just rode with it for a couple of years, and it really put a strain on my job and my relationships with my family, but I made it through. And in the third year, I became convinced that this was something more than just post-acute withdrawal as a result of my opioid use disorder. And the reason that I became so aware of that is because many of the challenges and issues that I had used heroin to stop had returned, and they had returned with a vengeance. And this time, I was at a level in my knowledge and my recovery to recognize that if I didn't do something about these challenges, these new mental health issues, it was very likely that I would relapse, and most likely I would end up dead as a result. Now, I'm telling you that because how I knew that I was moving into these depressing, dangerous times for me was because one of my dogs, Kumi, is what I would call an empath. And Kumi understands just intuitively. She can feel when my mood shifts. And when that happens, she will climb up on me. She will press her face really tight against mine. And basically what she's saying is, I love you, I know you're struggling, and I'm here for you. And it isn't just one time that she's done that. She does that every time. If my voice raises while I'm giving you this podcast discussion right now, I promise you she'd be right here with me. And she would be looking at me like, are you okay? So, about a year ago, right before I started the medications for my mental health issues, I was really depressed, and I was seriously considering suicide. And again, I had the means, I had a plan, I knew how to do it, and the ultimate goal for me was to make this stop. I needed to turn it off. I couldn't do it anymore. And every time those feelings became overwhelming, Kumi would show up, crawl all over me, and do the same thing. I love you, I'm here for you. And I had the same thought patterns. So I've shared all that, this information about my my depression, my substance use challenges, and how that impacted me as I kind of moved through my life over the last 50 plus years now. And as I've said over and over, the one constant that has been in my life, that has been filled with hope, has given me purpose. And it's amazing that I say this. It's almost shameful that I would say that even above and beyond my partners, my own children, for whatever reason, I didn't have the same level of, I have to remain alive in order to take care of, like I did with my animals. And I think it's because my animals just never judged. They never judged me. I could have axe murdered my grandma, and I would have come home and they would have jumped all over me and given me plenty of love. And at a time in my life, through most of my life, when it was, essentially rejection, marginalization, isolation, neglect, and, at times verbal and physical abuse, I pretty much didn't want anything to do with human beings, whether they were, my offspring or, somebody on the street. And what was really important to me was being connected to my animals, because it gave me a reason to live. And so today, here I am, 60 years old. I shared that I had, struggled in my post methadone days and obtained finally what I believe was an accurate diagnosis. And I got that from, a reputable and frankly a prestigious university hospital that I could trust. And I ended up there. I ended up seeing the psychiatrist there because I couldn't stand the thought that I was at a point once again in my life, after I'd accomplished basically everything I tried, a job and house and not in poverty, and I bought my first house at 52, and I actually pay my car insurance every month, if you can believe that. I never paid car insurance in my whole life, just enough to get the car insurance document so I could register the car, and then that's what poverty does to people, So anyway, I digress. But I struggled again with suicidal ideation. I struggled again with feeling like none of this matters. And the only thing that mattered was when Kumi crawled up on me, when she felt me going there, and loved on me. So today, I'm taking my medications. I'm in, I think the best mental and physical health I've been in many, many years. My dogs are around me. My cats are around me. My family's all around me, and I'm in a much better place today as a result of a holistic approach to helping me with my addiction and my mental health challenges. But let me be damn clear. I would not be here today if it wasn't for my animals. And my animals, at a time when nobody else could, they're the only ones who helped me remain alive long enough to make damn sure that they were cared for. And without them, I assure you, I would have completed those ideations. So it's not a stretch to say I owe my life to my dogs. I do. And the joy and the comfort and the hope and the responsibility that they brought to me were the only things in my life, really, that mattered. And until I entered recovery, they were the only things that I would have cared for. Now today I have my family back, and we're all moving forward together, and I've prepared all those relationships, and I, in good standing in the community. I've been in the same job for more than 11 years now, and I'm giving back every single day. I have to tell my brothers and sisters what I saw. It's why I'm on this podcast now. I recognize the horrific stigma that comes with suicidal ideation. I understand that. And I don't care, because this is something I need to wear on my sleeves so that everybody else who has experienced this doesn't feel any shame about sharing it. Because together, knowing that you're not alone, knowing that there are other people out there who have experienced this, who are going through it, who have gone through it, and who have used their animals as a way to support themselves until they were strong enough to once again carry their own hope. This is for all of you. And I hope that you'll listen to my words. I hope that when we're done, you'll find the nearest critter you can and love on them. And I wish you all the very best future filled with animals that you're able to create for yourselves. Thank you all for listening to me today.
Thank you so much, Steven. That was very inspirational, and it really touched my heart and really brought home the importance of how beneficial animals can be in our lives. Thank you again for sharing your story.
My pleasure, Tracy. And let me just add, as we close, what you bring to those of us who are out here struggling with our mental health challenges, our addiction challenges, it means more than I know that you understand this, but it just means so much to so many. So let me just thank you again for making that service available, making animals available to people who may otherwise never have that opportunity. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Steven.